Hey, I'm Sam, otherwise known as Pick Up Goliath, and welcome to this mix breakdown of my new song Cult, featuring Howard Jones on vocals, Scott LePage on guitars, and Mike Malyan on drums. Let's get straight into it. So here in front of me, I've got the exact session that I worked from. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what's in the session, and then we're going to dive into the drums and the electronic drum parts and into the bass parts as well. And then probably we'll have to get into a new session because otherwise it's going to start getting really long to look at the guitars and the synths and the vocals. Let's have a quick look at the overall mix structure first of all. So I've got my main mix bus here. Everything is coming out of my mix bus. I'll talk you through that in a moment. I've then got a vocals bus, so all of my vocal channels are coming into this vocals bus, which is just a track stack, which is being sent to that mix bus. I've got an instrument bus, so all of the instrument parts are going into this instrument bus. But before that, I've also got this additional bus, which is a no drums bus. So I've got all of the instrumental sounds that aren't drums or percussion going through that bus, which just allows me a little bit of extra control before that instrument bus. If I want to rebalance the drums and percussion with all the other instrumental parts, I've got them all on one fader there. That was a new thing actually that I started doing just on this session because I just wanted that extra bit of control. And then everything else is arranged in its relevant buses. So I've got drums, I've got the electronic drums, bass guitars, Scott's guitars in two different stacks for various reasons, some other guitars in there, synths and sound design effects and things in there. I've also then got on my stereo out, I've got some referencing things. So I've got my referencing plugin with a couple of tracks that I used to reference against when I was mixing this song. And I've also got this plugin called Decibel, which feeds to an iPad that I've got there. So I've always got my metering plugins up on an iPad in front of me with VU, with spectral meter, with peaks and loudness short term, all those good things in front of me. And then this Muse plugin is just feeding to my screen capture software to record the sound directly from my DAW. So let's take a look at what I've got on my mix bus right here. It's important for you to know that this is exactly what I used to master from. All I did was to take off this limiting that I've got here and bounce it out, and then I mastered this project. So what you're hearing is the mix minus the limiting. So I've got limiting here, which is just bringing up to a normal level of loudness so that when I'm mixing, it's at a more commercial level, but that's all it's doing. I've got some virtual tape, so adding a bit of saturation, a bit of analog warmth, and I've got some parallel compression on the mix bus, as well as bass room and mix room from mastering the mix, which is giving me high and low end EQ. That's basically it. Then on my instrument bus, I've got track spacer. So that is taking a sidechain input from my vocal bus into my instrument bus, so using the vocals to duck down a little bit the instrument bus. I've got some compression going on, and then some various EQs and things. I'll talk you through those things in a little bit more detail in due course, okay? Sort of as I get to the end of my drum processing, we'll go and look at those in a little bit more detail. Other than that, let's dive in. We're going to start straight away with the drums. So what I'm actually going to do is just mute everything else, and I'm going to get it out of the way so that it's out of sight, out of mind. And here are our drums. Now, this is Mike Malyan's drums. He was here in my studio to record these. So I'm going to take a little snippet here and let's hear what's going on. Okay, nice. So let's take just a section here and let me run you through the channels that we recorded, and then I'll bypass everything and we'll bring this mix back together one little piece at a time. So the channels that we recorded, we got a kick in mic, so that's a boundary microphone inside the kick drum sitting on the little Evans EQ pad quite close to the batter head. We've then got a kick out mic, which I think was a Beta 52 just outside the porthole, and then a kick sub mic, which I think was a Solomon sub EQ, whatever it's called, just for sub frequencies. On the snare, I've got a snare top and a snare bottom. This snare bomb track is in fact just some samples at the end. And then I've got 4 toms, so 2 racks, 2 floors, which is Mike's standard configuration, 2 up, 2 down sort of thing. Hi-hat and a ride, so individual spots on the hi-hat and the ride. Stereo overheads. And then for the room, I've got a stereo room, and I've got a mono crush microphone. I also recorded a little bullet microphone, a little harmonica microphone, which is something I saw previously, but I actually didn't like the effect of it, so I haven't used it at all in the mix, but we did track that. And those are our channels. There are 4 buses set up as well within my drums, which we'll come onto later on. So first of all, let's bypass everything and let's hear the raw drum sound as it came into the door. Okay, so the first thing that you should notice is we're working with a great recording. It sounds like a drum kit, yeah? In order to get a good mix, the easiest place to start is from a good recording. So if you haven't got a good recording to work with, the best advice that anyone can give you is go back and record again. So here we go. Let's look at our kicks first of all then. As I say, we've got 3 kick mics here. Let's just hide anything else, or at least collapse it so that we're looking at the minimum that we need to. So 3 kick mics. First of all, the kick in. So some bleed, as you'd expect, but actually not too bad. It's snappy, it's attacky, lots of top end. As I say, it's that boundary mic really close to the batter head, deliberately to get that sort of clicky sound that we want in a metal track. Then we've got the kick out mic, which is just outside the porthole. So much more low end, much more thuddy, thumpy, and then the sub. So those 3 things combined. So in terms of a metal kick, you've got that click, you've got that attack from the batter head, and we've got some nice thickness and roundness and punch coming from the combination of those other 2 mics. All I've done to those individually is to process them with the Oxford drum gate just to remove a little bit of bleed, so just to tidy up the signals. That's all I've done on all 3 of them. So just cleaning up the signal. It's not totally getting rid of all the bleed. You can still hear some cymbals, some overheads, and a little bit of snare bleed still in there, but a tidier signal. So I've gated. And that's all I've done to these individual elements. I've just used them and balanced them to create the overall sound that I want for that kick drum. And then I've processed things together as a kick drum sound. So here's my EQ, first of all. Now, I completely robbed this EQ setting from Nolly. If you know GGD, if you know Nolly from any of the stuff that he does online, he's an absolute wizard. I've learned most of what I do with my drum processing and with a lot of my mixing from him. So cheers, Nolly, for all of your education and all of the help that you've given so many people. This EQ setting I ripped completely from a tutorial that he did a while back on the Modern and Massive drum library, and this is the EQ settings that he dialed in for his kick. And I often just pull this up as a starting point for a rock or particularly a metal kick, because it's got that nice smiley face scooped thing. It's taken out a lot of the kind of woolly nonsense frequencies that you don't really want in a kick drum. And I often pull this up to see what's that like as a starting point. I don't know if I've adjusted this at all, but let's bring this in and out and we'll see what that sounds like. So I'm starting bypassed. So you can hear how with these scoops here at around 120 and around 300, 320, it's scooping out a lot of the thick woolliness that would leave us with an untidy and undefined kick sound if it was to be left in. And we've got a nice amount of space and sort of punch in this area around kind of 50, 60. And then we've got a nice amount of click coming through as well. So that's the first move that we're doing. You'll see that I've also got the auto gain function enabled here on the Pro Q3. I tend to use that a lot because I like the auto gain function to try and make sure that the signals that I'm listening to are relatively similar in level. Some like to use that, some don't. I use that a lot. After the Pro Q3 then, I'm going into the virtual mix rack from Slate Digital. I've started from their metal kick preset. This is something that I'll do a lot, and I'm not shy of telling people. I'll often start from a preset when I'm mixing and then use that to tweak. For stuff like, you know, a kick sound or a vocal sound or whatever it might be, especially something that's genre specific, if someone's already gone to the hard work of dialing in a sound that is suitable for a genre, like this metal kick preset in the virtual mix rack, this saves me a load of work. They've already chosen an EQ and a compressor that is, you know, to taste the sort of thing that I would be going for. And then I can just adjust this as I want it in order to make it fit with the kick that I've got. So let's work through what's actually in this rack here. So first of all, we've got this Neve style EQ. So adding a lot more slap here, a bit of sort of 1.5 and a bit of around 80 or 90 with a little bit more high pass going on. Then we're going into this compressor, which, if I recall, is actually being pretty gentle. 4:1 ratio, fairly slow attack, so we're letting through the click, we're letting through the transient, reasonably fast release. No more than sort of 3 dB of gain reduction there. Then we've got the classic revival that lots of people know and love from Slate Digital, adding a lot of thickness for girth and a little bit of shimmer on the top as well. So getting a lot more low end, a lot more punch from that. And then we're going into a virtual channel for some console emulation. I'm on the USA channel strip, which is an API style channel strip, which is going to be giving me a bit of kind of saturation. So let's hear that whole virtual mix rack on and off. Obviously, it's getting quite a bit louder through that signal chain as well, but it's also getting a bit more snappy and attacky, a bit more punchy as well, and the overall dynamics are being pulled down just a little bit with this compressor. After that, I'm saturating more with some virtual tape just on the kick drum. So I'm on 15 IPS, I'm on the 2-inch 16-track style. And you can hear how that is actually taming a bit more of the snap in the top. It's kind of reining that beta attack back in a bit more. To combat that, I'm then also actually using the Oxford Envolution, so an enveloper plugin effectively to put back in a bit more transient. I've got a lot of thickness and a lot of punch coming out already, and now I wanted to put back in a bit more kind of transient attack. So that's given me a bit of that click back in. And then I'm EQing again. Now, probably some of these things that come later on down in the signal chain are things that I've added in when I'm mixing everything in context. So I would guess down to this kind of tape, virtual tape emulation here, those are things that I did when I was mixing the drum kit just on its own, just to get a nice drum kit sound. And then the things that have come subsequently, I would imagine are things that I've added later when I'm mixing everything together. So when I'm starting to put all the other things in, I probably went, oh, actually I could do with a bit more snap, a bit more transient from the kick drum. So I just go and put on the involution there. Then maybe I identified some EQ things that I wanted to adjust, and I've added them there. Rather than going back into my signal chain, as I could have done, and adjusted them previously, I've just kind of tagged them on at the end, which is just the way that I've done things here. So in this instance, I'm high passing quite a lot. I've got this shelf which is probably doing nothing now I've high passed. Tiny little bump there at sort of 84, 85, and then cutting a bit of the slap in the top as well. So just cleaning up a bunch of murky stuff and taming the click a little bit. And then for some reason I've got some more tape emulation. Who knows why? But that's making it super punchy again. So that's the kick sound. Let's move on to the snare. So the snare over here, I've got a snare top and a snare bottom. Let's hear those individually. So pretty classic snare top and snare bottom signals. Lots of bleed, as you'd imagine from a snare sound. Let's hear those together. Sounds like a snare drum. So I've processed them a little bit individually first of all. Snare top, just a high pass. And then some SSL channel. So I am high passing again up to sort of 86, pushing a little bit of 8K for top end, pushing a little bit of 2.5, cutting a bit of the muddy stuff at 600, and then pushing a lot down at the kind of girthy end of it. Also compressing over here a little. So bringing out a lot of thickness and bottom end with this 200 bump. These pushes are pretty subtle, especially once it hits the compressor. I guess it was just to counter that low end bump. I think similarly with the snare bottom, yeah, same high pass. And then the SSL doing very similar things. Pushing down there, cutting around 600, pushing a lot harder around 8K. You can see I'm actually smashing the compressor a lot harder here. I guess I was looking to really flatten out the overall signal. So the biggest difference that you can hear there really is this heavy compression from the SSL on the snare bottom. It's really pulling up that overall kind of snare bottom level and giving a much more consistent signal. Mike loves to play a lot of ghost notes. He does a lot of them. So to help bring those out, really smashing hard that snare bottom is going to help bring those out a lot. All the other processing we're doing together on both things. So starting with EQ, what are we doing here? So I'm doing some expansion here around the fundamental to get a bit more of the tone, a bit more of the note of the snare, and then dipping a bit of the muddy gunk afterwards. I'm then dynamically compressing up at sort of 9-10K. Followed by, okay, so much more of a traditional kind of snare drum EQ, taken out a lot of things. I think similarly, this is taken from Unholy. I'm sure this is one of his EQ presets that I've just robbed straight from him. So again, you know, working towards that smiley face kind of sound, which is very synonymous with metal. So cutting out lots of gunky, muddy frequencies, leaving in the crispy top end and leaving in the body down the bottom. Once again, hitting VMR. Now I'm going to be distorting a lot with this Neve channel, and then some EQ and some console. So you can hear how I'm getting much more of a full-bodied snare drum sound now, much more kind of tone and girth. I'm using Soothe here to remove some hi-hat. You can hear how that's just taming some of that bleed that's coming through, some of that harshness in the real top end. And then Envolution. I guess I wanted some more transient snap. I'm starting from a punchy sound. You can really hear how that's giving me much more snap and punch. Then I'm looking to get rid of some of that bleed. So going back into the Oxford drum gate. Can't remember quite why it was that I chose to do my processing before gating this way around. There must have been a reason at the time, but I can't remember it now. But let's see what this gate is doing. So really subtle. The release on this gate is pretty slow. So it's, you know, not gating harsh. It's not gating aggressively at all. Then I am compressing pretty hard, I believe. I think I really wanted to smash this snare drum now, which I guess is a decision that I made in the mix again later on. Probably I mixed this snare drum all the way down to Soothe, and then in the mix, in context, I added these other things, similarly to how I did it with the kick. So I wanted more transient, then I wanted more sustain from the sound with this distressor. So not compressing too hard, 6:1 ratio. I'm getting around 6 dB of gain reduction, but it's on a slow attack, so letting all of the transient through to get all of that transient snap. And then after that, I'm using the Black Salt silencer, so I reckon this will be cutting out a lot of the bleed. So not removing all of the bleed, but removing a good amount of the bleed. So that's my kick and snare processing. Now let's go on to look at the cymbals. So I've got a hi-hat, I've got a ride, and I've got an overhead. Let's just listen to the overhead first of all, stereo overheads. So quite a nice wide sound. I'm just high pass, low passing. going into VMR. So I use some of Slate Digital's large diaphragm condensers, their modeling microphones, so that I could play with some different overhead sounds after the fact. And I settled on their FG37A model, which I'm then driving with this London preamp, going into 1176 style compression and then into console. So let's hear these things coming on one at a time. So this modeling mic is giving quite a lot of character to those overheads. So really getting quite a lot of signal through this 1176, which is squishing those overheads quite a lot. And I guess I did that to try and kind of focus on the cymbals and not let the drums be too overpowering in the overheads, because I want the cymbals to be the main feature of these overheads. And again, into some virtual console. Followed by Soothe, which I use a lot. Again, it's preset, cymbal smooth. I'm not afraid of using them. So really taking away a lot of the harshness and kind of aggressive edge that you might get. And then I've got a gain plug in here. That's right, to swap the left and right, because my live room's over there. So I record from my perspective, with left being over the right side of the kit and vice versa. But I wanted to mix from drummer's perspective. So at this stage, I then swap the left and right channels. So that's all that plugin is doing. Okay, so let's take a little listen to the ride just over here. So really just focusing on the bell sound there, which is, I think, what I wanted it for in general. So some expansion in the top end and some dynamic EQ down here to get rid of, I guess that's the snare drum that I'm trying to lose on the backbeats. Yeah, you can see how that's working just on the backbeat on the snare. And this expansion is really just focusing in on the bell. VMR, so modeling mic, trimming, and then some saturation I wanted to add here as well. I don't think I've actually got any just hi-hat in this track to show you, so I won't go over that hi-hat mic, but let's look at the whole blend of those three cymbal mics then. So then I've got some more EQ. So high pass, low pass, cutting out some top end, and then whatever this is doing in here. So this is side-chained to the kick bus, to bus 2 over here. So that's taking the kick signal and ducking this frequency according to when the kick drum is coming in. So I obviously didn't want too much kick being predominant in these cymbal mics. I just wanted to let the cymbals be the focus. Console on those three mics together. And then this plugin Rezo by Mastering the Mix, that is using its own algorithms, its own artificial intelligence to identify resonant frequencies that it doesn't like to tame them. So a bit like what Soothe does, you know, it's focusing in on the harshness on the upper end particularly, and just making it a more smooth sound. Following that, I've got what I call my all kit mics. So I've got my stereo rooms and I've got my crush mic. So here's the raw room sound. I'm starting off just by hitting that with a compressor, and this is side-chained to the kick, so I'm ducking the room signal with the input of the kick. So I guess I'm doing that because I didn't like the sound of the kick in the room mics. I just wanted to use the closer sound, so I'm ducking that over here. Then EQ. High pass, low pass, soothe, so very similar things. And again, gain to swap the left and right channels, same as the overheads. The crush mic just has this high pass, low pass on it. So I think I must have slammed that really hard on the way in. I've compressed that pretty full on. You can see there's still some transients poking through from the snare, but the rest of the signal is really squashed. So that's what that's doing. The bullet I didn't use in the mix, and then I've just processed these things together. So I've got EQ on everything, again sidechain to the kick. So using the kick to get rid of some more of the sound of the kick in the room mics. VMR for some console once again. And then I've got fresh air, which I am not doing anything with by the looks of it. So maybe I played with it and then did nothing. Yep, that's doing absolutely nothing, so we'll leave it bypassed. So those elements together, we've got kick, snare, and cymbals. Okay. So let's have a little listen to these toms as well. Let's find where I've got a nice amount of toms. Let's take this last little fill here. Okay, so I've got a very similar approach across all four toms. So I'm gating. You can see obviously I've been through and I've just cut out every section where the toms are. So that's helping the gates a lot, just being able to focus on, the areas where there's toms. That means I don't have to faff around too much with the thresholds because the moments where there are toms are focused. Okay, then I've EQ'd. My approach with EQing toms is very simple. It's basically a 4-step process. So I'll find the fundamental and I'll boost it. I'll find the stick attack and I'll boost it. I'll cut murkiness in between and I'll high pass up to the fundamental. And that's basically it. I'm sure we're going to see something pretty similar across all four toms, more or less. Boost the fundamental, boost the stick attack, cut murk in between, high pass on all four. 1, 2, 3, 4. With varying degrees, some needed a bit more, some needed a bit less, but that's basically my go-to approach. This one got an extra EQ on there, which I haven't done anything with, and then I'm processing them together. So I've got another EQ on here. So a bit of dynamic EQ just to control some of the bottom end. More stick attack, bit less murk. And then 1176 compression. Gentle ratio, just 2:1. But getting a good amount of input signal. So that's going to be giving us a bit more sustain, pulling these things out a bit more. Okay, so that is the individual processing that I've done to everything. Now, let's look at the buses that I've got set up. I'm going to do this room sim last. So the first bus that I've got here, bus 7, is parallel compression. I'm putting a lot of snare, quite a lot of kick, and a bit less toms, but no cymbals into the parallel compression. So that's going to be giving me a lot more sustain from those shells without any of the cymbal bleed. So let's bring that in and out. Let's give myself a larger segment here. What have I got? You hear how, particularly with the kick, it's bringing out a lot of kick, and then it's bringing out some length on the snare drum as well. It's also bringing out some tone from the snare, which I like a lot. So that's my parallel compression. I've then got 2 different reverbs set up. So I've got an overall drum verb. So that's here on bus 8. Again, just sending drum shells to that. No cymbals whatsoever. So I'm using Valhalla room, a large room, small wood room preset, and then I'm EQing that after the fact. So I am high passing, putting in some more of the low frequencies, and then cutting some stuff. Let's have a listen to that in and out. So it's a very natural drum room sound. It's not doing anything crazy big. It's a natural drum room sound. Then I've got this bus 9, and I'm just sending snare and toms to that bus. And this is a much more exaggerated reverb sound. So I'm using Valhalla room again, but it's on a snare big room preset, so it's going to be much larger. And then I'm compressing it a lot to really squash that signal altogether, followed by some EQ, so really focusing on the mid-range, aggressive high pass, taking out some 4K and low pass, and followed by whatever I'm doing, boosting the overall signal here. So really exaggerating the whole snare and toms there. Finally, I've got this bus 17, which I must have added after the fact, which is some room emulation. So I'm using Sound City Studio from UAD to create some faux drum room. So I obviously wanted some different room sound blended in there. Let's listen to it in isolation. You'll see that I've just sent the whole drum sound, all of the drum buses equally to this drum room. So I wanted a much more natural drum room sound here. Let's just solo this out. So it's compressed pretty hard, 1176 style within the plugin as well. And also it's EQ'd, well, it's got a tiny little bit of mid and high boost here in the plugin, but not much. So I've got, a heavily compressed drum room sound there. And let's blend that in and out of the kit. So muted. So very subtle, adding a bit of extra room sound there. And that's the whole kit. You'll notice that I'm not doing anything particularly flashy here. It's basically 3 simple stages. I'm EQing, I'm compressing a bit, not loads and loads actually, and I'm distorting, whether that's saturation through tape or through console or through preamps. I'm basically just doing those three things, and that's it. Yeah, okay, so there's a bit of gating as well. But, you know, there's no fancy tricks going on here. It's just the basics: EQ, compression, saturation. That is it. But then I'm processing the whole drum kit together on the drum bus. So I've got this 11K dip. So that's just controlling the aggressive kind of real shininess in the cymbals. And then I believe with this Pultec, as well as colouring a bit more, I'm then just taming a bit more super high end. I'm just attenuating up in this 20K area. So again, just controlling top end. VMR. So I've got SSL style EQ here, and I think I'm doing very little. In fact, I'm doing nothing with this SSL. What I am doing a lot of is this parallel compression with this distressor plugin, which will be compressing really hard. High pass engage, so it's not compressing the kick, but the mix is down at like 50%. Really squashing the drum kit together. That's really gluing it together a lot, and then driving it some more through some console after the fact. And then finally, just because everything's got super loud because of that parallel compression, I am just clipping, I think, just the real top peaks, just to control my signal a little bit. And you see that's just clipping the backbeat. That's just taking the snare just to pull those things together and make sure that I'm not clipping my meters. And that is the whole drum kit sound. Let us then move on and see what I'm doing in the electronic domain. So, a couple of things. In the intro section here, we've got this dub beat. Just a sample, right? I've just found a sample that I like and I'm using it. I've got channel EQ that's doing nothing. I've put some reverb on it with this soft tube. Which I think is just there because I've automated it at some point. Yeah, it's just automated, I think, at the end. Which must be what I'm doing on that channel EQ as well. It's just being automated at the end as an effect, really, which I suppose is what I'm doing with that as well. Let's have a look. Yeah, there's the automation on the high and lows and on the reverb. And then some EQ. Taking out some murk. Pushing some 2K. That's all that's doing. Then I've got this 808. It's taking a sidechain input from a guitar, which I believe is not even in use, so that is doing nothing. Got this Infinity bass from Slate Digital, which is going to be adding a lot of thickness around the fundamental of the track. So I will have identified that the track is in, I think it's in D, and I assume that the fundamental frequency for D is around 73. We can check that over here. Here is D. There you go. D is 73 cycles, which is why I've dialed this in at 73. So adding a lot of punchy thickness around the fundamental frequency of the track. And then all of these E drums, these will all be taken from the original track that I used as the basis for this arrangement. So these are all effectively stems from Riverboy, from the original OST, and I've decided what I want to keep and what I don't want to keep. And most things are left basically dry. The bongos have got some reverb on them for an effect, and then just EQ and compression on everything together. And there are various things in here. There's a snare, there's an off snare. Various different hi-hats and shakers, wood blocks, bongos. But I've obviously chopped a lot of things out. You know, these were full arrangements, and I'm just worked down to what works in my arrangement. So, you know, there will have been a lot more stuff here that I'm not using. So that's the drums and all the electronic drums. Let's bring up the bass guitar now. So I have got, let's come over here to the ending section. So I've got 2 bass channels. Let's mute these things here. They're both taking the DI signal, I believe. So they're both exactly the same signal. Same signal, same signal. So let's listen just to this DI signal first of all. Sounds like a DI, not bad at all. Let's go through the signal processing. So, Pro C2, compressing first of all. So compressing that signal pretty hard, and then gating, which is just going to be gating in these dead moments that I've also edited out quite a lot as well. Then going into CLA bass from Waves. Now this is going to be making it sound quite a lot more aggressive, I think. Getting a lot more low end thickness, but also clickiness from this. And getting some width as well, some stereo width going on. Going into, okay, this is Neural DSP Dark Glass. So this is going to give us all of the aggression from the drive up here. And then that is going into this IR impulse response, which is bass cab mic'd up 4x12 with some SM57s off axis, which is going to give us a much more real kind of bass amp in the room kind of sound. And then on the other channel, it's all exactly the same, except that I've got an impulse response loaded in here to make it sound like it's a cab in a room. That's it. So, you know, this is going to sound exactly the same. And there's my bass room sound. So it's a faux room sound, and together pretty thick and murky at the moment. So let's see what I'm doing to address that. VMR once again. A lot of top end going on in the EQ and taking out some bottom end. So this should be shaping that sound back towards much more the kind of metal aggressive bass sound with lots of top end. Yeah, get in there now. Some EQ, so cutting low end, boosting around 880. And then some further EQ. So I'm sure that these will have been, as with the drums before, these will have been things that I've added throughout the mixing stage. I've gone, okay, I need to, tweak that a little bit, push that a little bit. I haven't got enough of this, or it's too murky, or whatever. So these won't have all been things that I've dialed in at the time. These will have been things that have been added during the mixing process. So you can hear now we're getting much more of that kind of chanky sound up here. Tidier in the low end as well. Channel EQ, just cutting some 500. And then some multi-band, which is controlling the low end. Followed by Fuser. Now, I love this plugin. This is sidechained to the kick bus. So it's taking the kick as the input signal, and it is working out where the conflicts are between those two sounds and giving me a recommended EQ change, as well as with this button here, helping me make sure those two things are phase coherent. So if I bring just the kick and bass together, and then I'm going to bring Fuser in, you can hear how the work that Fuser's doing is making sure that there's space for the kick to come through the mix and not clash so much with that bass drum sound. So, love Fuser. And all those things together sound like this. So here's the drums and the bass together in context with all the electronic elements as well. And the one last thing that I haven't shown you is these snare bombs. I love a good snare bomb. So I'm sure these are just samples that I've taken from JST, Joey Sturgis. Just to really accentuate and make sort of overly dramatic this ending here. And that's all the drums and percussion and bass. So obviously I'm going to need to get into a part 2. So in the next part, we're going to be looking at all the guitars and synths and effects and stuff. So I'll see you in part 2.